Washington says it will call for a UN Security Council vote next week on a U.S. drafted resolution to extend an arms embargo on Iran, which expires in mid-October.
Next week, the United States will put forward a resolution in the Security Council to extend the arms embargo on Iran. The Security Council's mission is to maintain
Pompeo said that the U.S. will make sure the UN embargo is extended one way or another. The resolution is an updated version of a previous draft circulated in June. China and Russia have threatened to veto any attempt to extend the embargo. Pompeo suggests if the vote fails, that the U.S. will invoke so-called snapback mechanism, and that'll mean the reimposition of all UN sanctions on Iran. Snapback was envisioned in the 2015 Iran nuclear deal, which the U.S. has abandoned. Remaining participants in the deal say the U.S. has forfeited the right to invoke the mechanism. And joining us now for this news review is Mr. Michael Springmann, author and former U.S. diplomat, joining us from Washington, D.C., and Saeb Shaath, author and Middle East affairs expert, joining us from Belfast. Gentlemen, I'd like to welcome you both to the program. I guess we could start over there in Belfast with you, Mr. Saeb Shaath. Your thoughts on the story, please.
It's, you see, the United States of America's strategy always is to have Russia and China abstain in that regard in the Security Council, and obviously not to veto the United States of America's resolution. But today and right now, the strategy is working maybe with other countries, other members of the Security Council. So the U.S. is intending from this, when they know today, as Pompeo even hinted, and Craft, the United States of America's representative in the Security Council and UN, said Russia and China they were not going to come around, and obviously they're going to veto that. But why are they doing this? They are doing this only to try to corner the Chinese and Russia for propaganda purposes, to as the Craft said, to put the spotlights on the Chinese and Russian. Since the Trump administration maintained that quitting the deal does not prevent it from invoking the provision of the snapback mechanism, which is sanctions according to what they envisaged in the Iran nuclear deal. Other members of state, as you mentioned in your report, France, Germany, Britain, and plus Russia and China, they are trying to negotiate a solution which might prevent the United States of America from taking such a step. But till now, there is no clear compromise has emerged among them.
Thank you, Mr. Shaath. Mr. Michael Springmann, I'd like to welcome you to the program. Sir, your thoughts on these repeated attempts by the U.S. and when Washington says we're going to do it one way or another, considering that there's most likely going to be a veto coming out of China or Russia, what does Washington mean by that, Mr. Springmann?
Well, I think Mike Pompeo's title ought to be changed from Secretary of State to Secretary of Mistake. The man doesn't read his tea leaves properly. The United States has withdrawn from the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, and it cannot in any way, shape, or form try and get around a potential veto from Russia and China with this irrational view of having the snapback come into force, or to have a UN resolution again block or continue the arms embargo on Iran, which is set to expire in October of this year, just a few short months away. The whole issue is that even the American client states in Europe, Britain, France, and Germany, are skeptical of Trump and Pompeo's plans and statements and viewpoints, and they may not well even line up with the United States on this. They could well abstain from the lunacy. And as for the snapback provision, of course, this is aimed at destroying Iran and promoting the interests of Israel, which has just destroyed the port of Beirut. I think that they're not going to get very far with it. The Atomic Energy Agency, the IAEA, has repeatedly inspected Iran and found no violations of the agreement. And since Iran has been enriching uranium and storing more heavy water than was envisioned under the agreement, the Iranians have repeatedly said, give us an end to the sanctions, implement the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action in full, and we will simply stop enriching uranium, and we will get rid of it, and we will get rid of the excess heavy water. But somehow this doesn't ring a bell with anybody. They can't read the English language or whatever tongue that they read that the JCPOA was written in. So I think that Trump and his close circle of Zionist-loving advisors are going to get egg on their face again and again and again.
Thank you. And Mr. Saeb Shaath, what right does Washington have to even try to invoke the snapback mechanism at this point in the game?
The United States of America acting as a thug and a hooligan, no more. And threatening its own allies in like France, Germany, and Britain to follow suit. And they will do their best at the end of the day to do anything to impose these sanctions against Iran. Because the strategic aim of that is to keep imposing more sanctions and put more pressure on Iran to collapse Iran from within. They want to create, the whole thing is to create the mechanism for a regime change in Iran. So for two reasons. They wanted to put their hands on the wealth of the Iranian people and to serve the Zionist entity Israel so it won't face a developed and militarily strong country like Iran. They done that in the 90s with Iraq when they imposed sanctions and surrounded Iraq, and then they waged the invasion in 2003 with help of the Arab reactionary regimes in the area. They think that it might work with Iran, but it does not. It won't work with Iran. Iran is a very strong and powerful and united country now. It's totally different than the situation which Iraq found itself with. And Iran can face any challenges imposed, and it showed us lately with the last game wars it did, with the development it's achieved. This is why they're trying to corner the Chinese and the Russians, at least to abstain or to reach a compromise, which China and Russia say, yes, we can get something from you and we can allow you to keep these sanctions on. But I don't think that will happen. The Chinese now are at clashing point with the United States of America, and they need Iran behind them. The same thing goes with the Russians.
Thank you. And we're going to let Mr. Springmann get the last word. So, Mr. Springmann, you see the arms embargo expire on the 18th of October. How do you see things playing out at that point, considering it's a couple of weeks before the U.S. presidential elections, and with respect to the fact that the U.S. are saying, like we already alluded to this, we're going to make this extension happen one way or another. How do you see the things unfolding on October 18th, and between that time and as long, well, in theory, Donald Trump could still be in office for another 4 or 5 years, but if he's not, how do you see this thing playing out throughout the tenure of his presidency?
Well, I think he's going to work very hard to try and make this happen, although I frankly don't see how. He will simply come up, I think, with still more sanctions against Iran. And, of course, he will take the guidance of Israel, which is the only country in the region which has nuclear weapons, and which no one ever talks about, and no one ever requires them to give an accounting for them. I think that if Donald Trump were voted out of office in November, we'd have the Democrats in, and the Democrats have always strongly supported Israel no matter what. So I see no real change. I mean, the whole object of the game is to destroy Iran, as a distinguished gentleman in Belfast has said. So the Americans are going to try and do it one way or another, and they can't do it overtly, so they may well do it clandestinely. And, of course, the whole issue is with the legality of the issue. There is no basis for the American actions, and they're going to have to find some way of getting around this, and I frankly don't see any legitimate way of them doing so.
Gentlemen, I want to thank you both for joining us, Mr. Michael Springmann from Washington, D.C., and Saeb Shaath joining us out of Belfast. And viewers, that's a wrap for the segment of your Press TV's News Review. Thank you for tuning in, and goodbye for now.